Wonderful opportunity for me to consider the conference address by Elder Bednar that he gave in the most recent conference, where he talks about what we can learn from the Book of Mormon about preparing for the future. He makes the point, for example, that people in the Book of Mormon didn't have the Book of Mormon. It's a bit like the Bible. Nobody in the Bible had the Bible. Nobody in the Book of Mormon had the Book of Mormon. Um, the Book of Mormon was written for us. It was written for the last days. And Mormon, who abridged its records, the records that comprise the Book of Mormon, wrote as if writing to us. And so, therefore, we ought to study the Book of Mormon that way. Why was that written? To bless me, to prepare me for the second coming of Christ. He gives, as one example, a contrast that we find in the Book of Mormon. Now, often the Lord does this. He teaches in contrast, teaches in black and white, good versus evil, right against wrong. Sometimes he teaches in technicolor, which is what we get in the first, the degrees of glory, the different degrees. But often he teaches in black and white. One example of that is before Christ comes, a contrast between the Nephites and the Lamanites. Elder Bednar points out three things that happen. One, the more part of the Lamanites become righteous, they grow exceedingly in the knowledge of God, and the Lord begins to pour out his spirit upon them. In contrast, though there were many of the Nephites who became wicked, and they rejected the words that were taught to them by the prophets. They also start to dwindle in unbelief. I think that's very reflective. We grow in faith, we dwindle in unbelief. That is, there's a contraction of the spirit that takes place when we start to disbelieve, when we don't believe that which the Lord has promised. And finally, the Spirit of the Lord began to withdraw from them. And in all of these, you see a process. And Elder Bednar comments on how quickly the process took place. Within a space of not many years, the Lamanites had become exceedingly righteous, and the Nephites had become exceedingly wicked. Therefore, if we are not faithful and obedient, we can transform the God given blessing of prosperity into a prideful curse that diverts and distracts us from eternal truths and vital spiritual priorities. And this is one of the tests that we face in our dispensation, in our day, is the prosperity and the ease with which we've all heard of, for example, diabetes. Diabetes is a disease of prosperity. And similarly, there are some diseases of the soul that can happen because of our prosperity and our chances for education. He notes, for example, that what had happened was there was a pride had entered into their hearts because of their chances, their riches and their chances for education and their prosperity, and just warns against pride entering into our hearts. He notes that apostasy can occur at two basic levels: institutional and individual. So the institutional is when the church becomes apostate. And of course, that has happened anciently. But we have the promise that it will not happen in this dispensation. Joseph Smith said, the standard of truth has been erected. No unhallowed hand can stop the work from progressing. The truth of God will go forth boldly, nobly, and independent till it has penetrated every continent, visited every clime, swept every country, and sounded every ear, till the purposes of God shall be accomplished, and the great Jehovah shall say, the work is done. So this is a promise that there will not be an institutional apostasy. There will not be a general falling away of the entire church. But at an individual level, we must beware of pride lest we become as the Nephites of old. Let's not be proud of what God has given to us, physical, material blessings, but also spiritual blessings that the Lord has given to us. Let's not use them to say, well, I'm untouchable. I can't be changed. In fact, there's a risk that if we feel that way, we're very susceptible. He says, may I suggest that if you or I believe we are sufficiently strong and stalwart to avoid the arrogance of pride, then perhaps we already are suffering from this deadly spiritual disease. Simply stated, if you or I do not believe we could be afflicted with, with and by pride, then we are vulnerable and in spiritual danger. And in the space of not many days, weeks, months, or years, we may forfeit our spiritual birthright. And therefore, he pleads with us that we would walk in the meekness of the Lord's Spirit, so we will avoid and overcome pride and have peace in Christ. Now, this is a wonderful promise that the Book of Mormon is meant to teach us. It teaches us by presenting opposites, by teaching that you have your agency and there are options that you can choose between. And I'm going to present you the two most contrasting options I can between growing in that which is true or dwindling from it, growing in righteousness or dwindling away from righteousness, apostasy, turning away from truth. And so it's a wonderful discourse just to remind you that the Book of Mormon was written in a, to teach us that in a polarizing day, we will be faced with a choice. I'm either coming unto Christ or I am drawing away from him. I'm either believing in the more part of that which he taught, or I'm dwindling in unbelief. I'm either increasing in my humility, or I am in danger of being subject to pride. And that change can happen quickly. Oftentimes people say, I'm too old to change. And you know that that's not true because you could get worse. You could get worse. You could do worse. And if you can do worse, you can do better. We can always change. We can always improve. We can always go one step further. And the Lord will always invite us to do more. And I know that that's true. And I testify of that.